Hey everybody! Welcome to our weekly live stream. Happy to have you here. I'm getting started a minute late. You can call me on it. But I was running from one meeting to another meeting, so I apologize. Didn't mean to keep you waiting. Give everybody a minute to join. And then we'll get into everything we've got on our plate today. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, if this is your first time, let me just let you know. Put your comments in the chat, questions in the chat, anything you're curious about, anything you want to talk about, put them in there. We'll try to get to everything. Joe Connor sharing some news with everybody in the chat. Yeah. All right. So where to start? What have I done in the past week? I just got off a call with the 10th representative district in our state. Opportunity to share with them why I'm running, what I'm running for, things I'm fighting for. So that was a great opportunity and why I was running a little bit late. I've been doing a lot of interviews, particularly one with a blog podcast called Redaction Politics, particularly focused on foreign policy, and one called the Getting to Know You podcast, which is has a host actually right here in the state of Delaware, where we just get together and talk about who I am, and obviously mixed in some policy there and made sure that that message got out there too. Another thing, and I really just want to shout out one of our organizers, Taisha, for this. She has been a longtime healthcare worker and has seen firsthand what has been going on in our medical centers and medical facilities during this COVID-19 pandemic. And because of her experience, she actually organized a healthcare town hall last Thursday, gave us an opportunity to come together with a bunch of healthcare workers, both medical, mental health, and talk about what has been going on during this pandemic, what the issues that they were facing even before that, and how these things have only been amplified by the pandemic. And, you know, one of the things that really stuck with me, not to retell the whole thing, but this really stood out, is that when we're talking about medical assistants and other medical professionals that exist within the delivery of care, a whole lot of people are not making living wages. And I think that's crucial to remember, particularly as we start to talk about moving toward a Medicare for All system. It has to also include good wages for every single person who is delivering care in that system, and that's from people who are working administrative jobs to the people who are cleaning rooms and keeping the facility safe and clean, medical assistants all the way, nurses all the way up through doctors and all medical professionals, because these workers were sharing their stories of how they've been working for 20 years and they're making $13.50 an hour and they're struggling to pay rent. They're delivering medical care, but they're also having to work second jobs. And again, these are just unjustifiable things that we can absolutely fix. And we fix it by getting the motive of profit out of our healthcare system. When we are trying to get profit out of healthcare rather than health out of healthcare, people end up underpaid, people end up sicker, and we see that. We know this issue. We are at a point where not having single payer healthcare is nonsensical. And everyone who stands against that, I think that we should be calling them on the carpet and forcing them to explain exactly why it is that they hold that position right now, particularly in a moment when millions of people have lost their jobs and their health insurance along with it. We can absolutely be doing better by people. The pragmatic position is to adopt a Medicare for All system to ensure that everyone in that system actually is paid living wages, and that we focus on delivering care, not profits. So that was a fantastic town hall, and I just want to shout out Taisha for organizing that. Yesterday, I kind of got back out into some neighborhoods. You know, we are not fully canvassing yet, but I did want to do some lit dropping, particularly because people are starting to receive ballots already. If you have requested a mail-in ballot, you're going to be getting one soon. So I thought it was important to get back out there and try to socially distance, wearing a mask, get some literature in front of people. And I was still able to have some conversations, you know, people who were open to having conversations, people who wanted yard signs. Shout out if you wanted a yard sign. reach out, let us know, send us a DM. People who wanted yard signs, people who wanted to have like long conversations about the issues so that they were informed when ready to vote. And I talked to quite a few people who supported, so that was awesome. This is an opportunity for you to get involved. I'll say, I think we're still keeping most volunteers focused on the phones so that we can reach voters and make sure we're still having these conversations, particularly as ballots are hitting. So please, I'll say it again at the end, but sign up to volunteer, help us phone bank, have some good conversations with Delawareans who need our platform to help their lives. And you can sign up at justfordelaware.com/volunteer. And as I said, Joe Connor a little bit spilled the beans as soon as he got into the chat, but I'm happy to see it, and we're really happy to announce that we have big news today. If you hadn't seen it, State Rep John Kowalko endorsed our campaign. We're super proud to have his endorsement. He has spent the past decade fighting for working people in the General Assembly in our state, and I am really proud to have his endorsement. And I think recognizing that we need people who are focused on the working class through all levels of government is incredibly important. When I've done live streams with candidates for city council and general assembly like Medina Wilson-Anton and Marie Pinckney and Shanae Darby, we talk about the importance of building power at all levels of government and supporting people who are committed to working people at all levels of government, because we have to tackle these systemic problems that we're facing. And I'm grateful to be a part of this movement and to be helping build it alongside incumbent council people and like Councilwoman Jen Wallace, as well as Representative John Kowalko, because this is how we build a government from top to bottom that puts people over profits. Okay. All right, let's get into maybe some current topics. Let's see. So I always try to talk a little bit about a couple news things that are going on. There was a headline about the Delaware courts trying to quote unquote flatten the curve of eviction cases as particularly unemployment assisted ends. So I talked last week about how there's been this warning of a quote unquote tsunami of evictions now that the federal eviction protections and state eviction protections, as well as the federal unemployment benefits, have expired. Our government and our representatives failed us in this moment and failed to extend unemployment benefits, failed to extend eviction moratoriums, and have left working people on a cliff. And this is a huge crisis. It's going to hit Delaware hard. It hasn't hit yet. But we know that there are approximately 30% of Delawarean renters who are going to be at risk of eviction. And the state is trying to push cases to mediation and keep them out of the courts and hopefully find a way through that is not eviction. But there's no guarantee that that's going to work for anyone. And it still creates housing instability for people while they're going through that process. And we know that there is a backlog of eviction cases of about 1,400. So there are a lot of people who are sort of in that position of instability already and fearful that they may lose housing in the midst of this pandemic. So this is a place where we need our representatives to be full-throated in their support for the continuation of the additional UI payments. Those were the things that were keeping people afloat right now. They were the things that were making people feel for the first time, oh, I can actually survive. I mean, people who were making more with that additional UI unemployment assistance felt for the first time stability. And now we've ripped it back out from under them when we still are not in a place where they can go back to work. So I would absolutely be fighting for continuing those UI payments. I would be fighting to continue eviction moratoriums. I still think we need to be fighting for cancellation of rents and mortgages, because there are far too many people who are going to be on the cliff of eviction or foreclosure for no fault of their own, and that will harm their ability to have housing stability for the rest of their life, or at least quite a while it stays on their record. Some other things that are going on, these are not great headlines, but Housing and Urban Development put forward a new rule that would eliminate protections for trans people who are seeking HUD-funded services. So this is vile. I mean, trans people, particularly black trans women, already face some of the most housing instability, struggle to find stable housing or even shelters if they're experiencing homelessness where they can stay. And now this is making it even harder. It's a new rule that would eliminate the language that obligated shelters to accept trans people in need of housing. So, again, in the midst of a pandemic, when we know more people are going to be facing housing, this administration is being incredibly cruel and targeting trans people. So we need to stand up for trans people. There's an opportunity to actually make public comment on this, so we can share a link for that, because I think it's important that we stand up and stand in solidarity with trans people, particularly those who are experiencing homelessness, because we already know that homelessness is a problem that we can solve. HUD itself has said that it would take just $20 billion to end this problem. Yet we have an department and an administration who is using cruelty toward trans people rather than solving the problem of homelessness, using their department to harm people rather than solve homelessness. And it's not enough to simply say this is bad. Like, we need to actually be putting forward legislation and be putting forward budgets that actually fund HUD to do the investment that we need in affordable housing, in expanding Section 8, in building housing so that we can actually guarantee housing for every single person in this country. It is a problem we know we can solve. We need representatives who are committed to solving it. So those are some of the topics that I just wanted to hit on. I think also just want to make sure everybody knows that we may be facing a tropical storm warning starting tomorrow. So please be on the lookout for that. It's supposed to be quite a bit of rain. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to kind of prepare yourself in your house for that. I had a moment earlier today where I remembered back in March saying to myself, oh God, like, imagine this pandemic when a hurricane hits or some natural disaster hits and people need to go into a shelter when they're not going to be able to socially distance. And I had that fleeting thought, and to myself I said, we can get this under control before hurricane season starts. And I'm so disappointed that that has not been true. And I'm really concerned about the danger that people could be put in the case of a natural disaster in the midst of a pandemic. So I think, again, we need to be committed to ending this. We need to combat at every turn this misinformation that mask wearing is ineffective. We need to recognize that multiple scientists have told us that if we could wear masks for 4 to 6 weeks, we could eradicate this. We have to keep being committed to that and ensure that we can actually stop this. I mean, it feels like so much of our federal government has basically thrown its hands up and said there's nothing they can do and they're going to let it run its course. We can't allow that to happen. I mean, we can't continue to allow over 1,000 people to die. Like, we need to do the work of demanding actual relief, do the work of doing that at every single level. State government, ensuring the federal government is doing more, and ensuring that any person in your individual life who is going out and saying that this isn't a big deal, we need to get herd immunity, mask wearing isn't for me, it's not anything that you hear, it's on us to step up and say and counter that. A lot of those conversations have to happen one-on-one. It can't be this kind of even social media based conversation. I think that, we see people sort of retreat into their already held beliefs when we have those conversations, but I think it's on us to help do the work of sharing how we make a difference here and how we actually put an end to this, because we can't just be talking about reopening schools when that happens. We're seeing hundreds of people get sick, like is happening in Georgia, or camps. We're seeing it happen in Major League Baseball, which should be an entirely controlled environment, should be able to take care of its players, and yet we can't. So I think we have to, for those of us that are committed to fixing this, we have to stay committed. It's unfortunate that our government has completely failed us, and it's unfortunate that we have not gotten clear direction that has led to so many people making choices that they shouldn't have because the direction was unclear. So if there are people in your life that are doing things like that are saying things like that, like, I know it's unfortunate that it has to fall to us, but this is what happens when we have a government that's dysfunctional and isn't looking out for the needs of people. Okay, some questions. Okay. So Jonathan asks, I personally overheard a former health insurance CMO say that America needs universal health care. I agree. How do we get this unstuck in the Congress of the United States? So I think that this goes back to kind of a lot of the issues that we have with things not moving in our current Congress. I don't know that you're going to get this unstuck with the current people that you have. But that doesn't mean that you don't stay committed to it. It doesn't mean that you don't do the work to try to replace the people who are quote unquote stuck. We have to stay committed to this because change actually comes from the people. And it's not going to come top down, it's going to come bottom up. So we have to continue to build political will and political mandate. I mean, we are seeing it happen in real time, right? What was the latest poll? I think nationally, Medicare for All has 69% support. We know the people want this. We have leaders who are standing in the way of our own progress. And the core issue there is that we have leaders who are committed to corporate donors and special interests over the needs of people. So until we replace them and we eradicate money in politics, it's going to be an uphill battle. But it doesn't mean that we don't get there. We have to keep winning seats. We have to keep winning the minds of the people. We have to, kind of like I was just saying with the pandemic, always call things out when we hear them. If someone says, oh, but I don't want to lose choice, talk about how choice was manufactured by the insurance industry PR people as a way to convince people that they had choice in a place where they don't. Talk about the fact that the choice you get with Medicare for All is what doctor you want to see, not what insurance company you get to enrich. And remind them that in a state like Delaware, if you are getting insurance from your employer, you probably don't have a choice. There's probably maybe one plan available. And if you don't get insurance from your employer, you have to go to the marketplace where there's only one company available. So what choice do we really give people? The choice that people want is, who can I go to get the care that I need? And that's the choice that we can give them with Medicare for All. And we can get there when we replace people who are standing in the way, particularly Democrats who are standing in the way. And we get there when we get money out of politics. Jonathan's asking if I have Viking economics on my bookshelf, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of these books are a mashup of mine and Bill's, particularly this shelf, so I'm not sure, but I will follow up. If I have not read it, if it is here, I will admit that. I'm not going to pretend I've read a book that I haven't. Next question. What do you think of Obama not endorsing AOC? I did hear that Obama endorsed people today. I did not look at the list. I was making phone calls all day trying to get donations. Again, let's get publicly funded elections so that I can stay plugged into what's going on in the world. So I have not seen the list of people that Obama endorsed. I certainly can't speak to what's driving the decisions that he made. I don't think he endorsed, every sitting Democrat, and maybe there's a feeling that AOC does not have a real challenge in her general election, and that, getting through the primary was what she needed to win. But I do think it's important that when people with a platform are going to make endorsements, that they recognize how to use that platform to really build power, and how to put people in place that are going to actually fight for working people. And, I think we look at how many seats we lost across the country in the 8 years of an Obama presidency, and we have to really reflect on like why that happened. And I think part of why that happened is because we weren't advocating for policies that benefit the working class. And those are the people that we need to be, those are the candidates that we need to be fielding. Those are the people that we need to be getting behind. And we know this platform brings people in. You know, I've seen it on my own campaign. People who say, this is the only campaign they even want to vote for because it's actually something to vote for. People who say, I was an independent or I was a Republican, but I'm changing my party affiliation to vote in this primary. So we have to get leaders and people with platforms on board with pushing for this progressive policy movement, because this is what the people need, it's what they demand, and it's what gets them engaged. And that's what we really need to be looking at. So a lot of establishment Democrats simply don't focus on expanding the electorate. You hear conversations about how do we win back people who maybe moved right, or how do we make sure that we keep the same people who always turn out in primaries and we just try to get at least half of them to win. But the biggest voting bloc in our country are people who don't vote. And there's a reason they don't vote. It's not solely because of voter suppression, though that's a large part of it. It's a lot of it because they don't feel engaged. They don't feel like anyone's there to represent them. And there's a lot of people who are disillusioned because of that. And the work that these progressive policies do is to bring people into the fold, to say, we need to fight together for ourselves. It's about us coming together and taking back power and leading for us. And I think that's what we need to be focused on, and endorsing people that do that up and down the ticket. It's what even our campaign has been trying to do with our platform, is look at candidates up and down the ticket who are fighting for working class people. All right, let's see. Garrett asks, can you talk about your democracy reform platform, including campaign finance, voting access, etc.? So I think that we have yet to live up to the principles of liberty and justice in our country. And we need real democracy in our government. You know, there was a study conducted by Princeton that noted that right now, the will of the people and what the people are asking for essentially has no influence on what policy gets passed. And that's a real moment and concept that we need to recognize and say, that's what happens in an oligarchy. That's what happens when you don't actually have democracy. We have representatives who get elected and then fail to actually represent the needs of their constituents. That's a major problem that we have to fix. And I think, again, going back to my comment earlier, a lot of it has to do with the influence of money. We need to ensure that democracy is protected, that we are protecting free speech, and that we are actually guaranteeing a dignified standard of living and people can actually thrive in our country. So I am committed to getting money out of politics. That means, for me personally, refusing all corporate PAC money, particularly pharma money, fossil fuel industry money. You cannot take the money of the corporate executives of the industries that you need to regulate and do it effectively. And we've seen that. You know, my opponent takes quite a bit of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry, and then writes legislation that benefits them, opposes legislation that benefits us, things like importing drugs to lower drug prices. So we absolutely, our campaign doesn't take any corporate PAC money. We need to end Citizens United. I was thinking the other day that I don't think I'll ever forget where I was when I heard the Citizens United decision. And it was a really impactful moment on me. And what we need to do is end that decision and move toward publicly funded and financed campaigns. And what that means is that it levels the playing field. When I got into this race, my opponent already had over $2 million in the bank. When we move to publicly funded elections, everyone is working from the same pool of money. It allows working class people the ability to actually run and not see these daunting numbers of, oh, my opponent has raised this millions and millions of dollars, why would I ever try to run up against them? And I think we've seen in a lot of the races recently where there's been a progressive challenger, money doesn't always win. Policy really wins. Fighting for people really wins. Money does a really good job of drowning out that message, though. So if we level the playing field, everyone gets the same amount of money to run for the same seat, the ideas will win, the people will win, not simply the money will win. So when it also comes to just the idea of democracy reform, I think another piece of that is protection of privacy and speech is incredibly important. So ending mass surveillance in our country is incredibly important to me. So things like the Patriot Act, FISA, things that get lumped into the National Defense Act. So any sort of warrantless privacy violations, and expand protections for whistleblowers so that if things are happening, if we have people who want to report on misuse of surveillance, particularly of people in our country, they are protected when they do that. Internet freedom is incredibly important to me too, and I think we have to be fighting for things like restoring net neutrality and passing an Internet Bill of Rights to protect our privacy and our data. California has adopted a decent measure on that, the CCPA, that we can hopefully continue to extend nationally to protect people's privacy and data. We also have to stand against bills that, frankly, my opponent is supporting out of committee, things like the Earn It Act, which are barely veiled attempts to attacks on encryption. Essentially, bills that would start to say any service that has encryption has to bake in a backdoor so that federal law enforcement could get into your encrypted messages or your encrypted data. Things like that, I believe, are violations of privacy, and we need to fight back against them. You also talked about voting access. So I think we need universal vote by mail, and I think we need to do it differently than has been adopted in our state. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen that I put up a video today about the mail-in ballot application that people are going to start receiving. I think that we need to go straight to, we send every single person a ballot, not an application to then request a ballot. It creates a two-step process that we're going to lose people at. It creates complication. It also makes the process longer. I noticed that the date on my letter from the Board of Elections was July 17th. I only received that letter, I think the 1st or July 31st or August 1st. So it took 2 weeks for me to even get my application. If I send that back in, is it going to take another 2 weeks? And if I get 2 weeks to get my ballot, 2 weeks to send my ballot back in, if that's the timeline we're looking at, people are going to actually miss the deadlines. So I think universal vote by mail, sending people actual ballots. I think Washington State has a fantastic model for this, where they actually send you also a booklet of information about all the candidates that you can possibly vote for, so that you have an opportunity to hear from that candidate even if you haven't had a chance to speak to them directly. I think that we have to restore the vote for all currently and formerly incarcerated people. We should not be taking the right to vote away from people, and absolutely restore the Voting Rights Act and look at things like automatic voter registration, things that are going to expand the electorate, taking away the barriers from people being able to vote. In that same vein, Dan asked the question about thoughts on ranked choice voting. I think this is in the same vein. Things that make our electoral system more accessible to more people and fairer for candidates who are outside of the establishment is incredibly important. And what happens a lot of times is that without things like ranked choice voting, it's a lot harder for an insurgent candidate or a challenger candidate to win and to break through. I'm seeing, Maine is a state that has ranked choice voting, and I've seen quite a bit of people talking about, vote for the independent candidate who is pushing for really people-centered politics, if that's what you care about. And then you can, because if they don't cross the threshold of votes needed to win, your vote moves to another candidate and doesn't get quote-unquote wasted. And I think people get a little afraid sometimes of voting for a challenger candidate over, the fear that they may lose. And ranked choice voting kind of takes that away and takes away that barrier that people face when they're voting for a challenger. A lot of voting questions. Maggie asked, do you believe voting is an absolute right and shouldn't be taken away in any situation? Yes, kind of what I got at before. I don't think we should be taking voting rights away from people who are incarcerated. Particularly in the state of Delaware, this has been a problem because we encountered a whole lot of people who did not know that their voting rights had actually been restored. So people who had felony charges thought they were still barred for life from ever voting again. That law was changed about 4 or 5 years ago, but there was no communication out to people. So there were people who were able to vote for 5+ years and didn't know and weren't able to take advantage of their rights. So I don't think that we should be taking voting rights away. I think it's an absolute right. Jonathan asks, what will you and should we do if the president does not accept the results of the presidential election? This is a daunting question. And I think in some ways it is a fair one because this president has bucked norms since day one, since before he was president. I think that we have to be prepared for that level of rejection of our democracy. And that might mean taking to the streets, organizing, and ensuring that we don't let this clearly authoritarian leader demolish the bit of norms we still have. I think he's already been able to get away with far too much from a Congress that is refusing to hold him accountable, from people simply, wagging their fingers and expressing how concerned they are, but not taking seriously their role as a check on his power. And that is essentially escalated to a point where now it's almost like you call out corruption and people almost shrug like, oh yeah, well, he's a corrupt person. And I think the fact that we've gotten to that normalization is really daunting and troubling, and we absolutely cannot allow that to happen in the case of anyone contesting election results. Gabe asked about Glass-Steagall and Dodd-Frank. I believe we absolutely need to reinstate both Glass-Steagall and Dodd-Frank protections. I was really disappointed in my opponent for rolling back protections that were put in place with Dodd-Frank after the recession to protect consumers. Garrett asked what my favorite baseball team is. This is a hard one. So I grew up a Yankees fan, and then I kind of fell out of love with Yankees because they were just paying players big money to kind of come, and they weren't really committed to building a farm system. And then I started playing a whole lot of fantasy, which made it so that I really fell in love with different players, not necessarily teams. But I would say the teams that I most enjoy watching are the Oakland A's, the Phillies, and I loved the Astros, but the cheating thing, it's really kind of broken my heart, so it's made it hard to like the Astros right now. Gabe asked about net neutrality. I mentioned that before, but yeah, I firmly support net neutrality. We should not be creating a tiered system of our internet where people can pay for better service or people who don't pay get throttled service. I believe that we should be pushing to make the internet a public utility that is guaranteed in every single home and actually guaranteed high-speed internet. That's a problem in our state of Delaware. And I think particularly people who have good internet service or cell service in our state don't recognize that. But particularly downstate in western parts of the state, you can run into complete dead zones when it comes to cell phone coverage as well as broadband internet. And that is something that we need to be considering part of our public infrastructure and building out and ensuring that high-speed internet is brought into every single home in our country. And we've seen the effects of that, particularly during this pandemic. Children being told, okay, well, your classes are just going to go online, but if they don't have reliable internet at home, they were forced to go to parking lots to use Wi-Fi to take their classes. And maybe that worked out during the spring when the weather wasn't too extreme, but if it were the winter or the dead of the summer right now where it's been 95 degrees every day, that's not a solution. And it was a solution in the moment when we needed to act, but it cannot be the long-term solution. We have to put internet in everyone's home and actually build it out like a public regulated utility. Adam asked about thoughts on TikTok possibly being banned and how he's mixed on it. I'm going to be honest, I don't know exactly what TikTok is being accused of from a data collection standpoint. I've seen some mixed reviews and about like people saying they were collecting data that they shouldn't have and people kind of countering that. But in the same vein of what I've been talking about with internet privacy and surveillance, there are some real issues with data collection on all of these sites: Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, etc. I think that's a really important reason why we need people in Congress who actually use these tools and understand these tools. You know, I come from a tech background. I've done technical and digital product management. I've worked in strategy on the internet. So I have a perspective of what these companies do with our data. I have a perspective on the way that they allow users to abuse their platforms, which is something that we frankly have seen with Twitch, where US military was using their esports team and the platform of Twitch to essentially groom potential recruits, allowing kids as young as 12 or 13 to fill out forms to win an Xbox controller, but basically be put on a mailing list for Army recruitment. So I think we need a Congress that better understands the technology that people are using and recognize the influence that these platforms have over data, media narrative, everything that people believe, and actually does the work to either break them up or nationalize them, but get this under control, because we have seen what it means for them to run wild, and it's been a real harm, frankly, to our country and our democracy. Okay, so Brant asks a few questions. Do you support a wealth tax? I do. I think both Senator Sanders and Senator Warren laid out good plans in their presidential campaigns. I think a wealth tax is important because there are a whole lot of people in our country who don't make money from their labor, they make money from their money. And an income tax will never touch the wealth that Jeff Bezos, for example, has accumulated. You know, his income is $80,000 a year. He's paying tax on that. But his net worth is generated via his money making money. And income tax is never going to touch that. And there is no reason that one person should have well over $100+ billion, money you could never spend in a lifetime, while we have people who quite literally cannot keep a roof over their heads. Wealth inequality in our country has contributed to the breaking down of the social fabric of our country. So we need to use the tools that we have at our disposal to fight back against it. What's your plan to convince moderate Senate Republicans to support a Green New Deal? It's funny you call out Senate Republicans, because I'd argue there's a whole lot of Senate Democrats who also don't support a Green New Deal, including my opponent, who tell us that this is a fantasy and it's a dream and completely wild-eyed to have ambitious goals to combat climate change. I think that it's important to call out the fact that any climate policy that doesn't meet the scale of the catastrophe is essentially in the same vein as denying climate change as a whole. Because this is not a issue that we can be too small on. There is no reason in this moment to not be ambitious, to do all that we can to remake our country and our economy and our infrastructure to combat climate change and prevent the worst effects of it. And I say the worst because we know we are already seeing effects of it, particularly in Delaware, where we are losing farmland to saltwater intrusion. We are losing beaches. We see flooding regularly in our state. And we have the potential to have more than 2 months of extreme heat days every year. We have the potential to lose the port of Wilmington, which is an economic center for our state and a source of great union jobs for black and brown people in our state. There are real catastrophe level issues that our state is facing. So to have people who are representing us who don't want to step up to this challenge and be ambitious is a slap in our face. And I think it's barely a step above being anti-climate science when you are proposing solutions that are far too small to save us. So I think it's a matter of using my platform to reach the people throughout the state of Delaware and our country as a whole to build that political will. Again, like, it has to come from the people. We have seen our conversations change as we do that work. We talk more about Medicare for all now than we ever had. And yes, talk is not enough. We need to elect people who will fight for it. But I think we're getting to that point where people see this as a table stakes issue, and we need to do the same with the Green New Deal. And I commend the work of groups like Sunrise Movement that are doing that, because these things have become part of our daily vocabulary. And that's a real first step to actually getting change. Getting the minds of the people on board, getting them convinced that this is the thing we need to do, and then using their power to replace the leaders, I use that term loosely, who are refusing to support it. And I think that we have to really look at what is it that you do with power. Because if you become a senator and you don't fight tooth and nail every day to benefit the lives of working people, what is the point of having that power? Like, I am not doing this for my own ambition. I am doing this to win power for the people. And I think we have way too many people in our government right now who solely want to hold on to power rather than wield it for the good and the most public good that they can possibly create. And those are the people we have to replace. And that comes with organizing. It comes with constantly talking about how climate change in particular is the biggest threat to our country and our world as a whole. It comes with talking about, you have to find the argument that works with people. And that's what being a good advocate and organizer is really all about. The same bullet points or talking points are not going to win over every person. You have to figure out what it is that hits home with them and have these individual conversations. For some people, it's going to be a moral argument. It's going to be, we will lose lives as air quality worsens and kids with asthma will be unable to breathe. For some people, it will be, we will have to save the lives of refugees who have to leave their homelands simply because it's no longer livable. For some people, it will be that it will cost us more to let climate change run its course than it will cost us to defend ourselves against it. So it's really about figuring out what it is that wins over individuals and then using the power of those individuals to get representatives into seats that are actually going to be committed to doing the work that's necessary and the legislation that's necessary. All right, what time is it? 8:15. Ivan says, legalization of marijuana? Yes, Ivan, we need it. I believe we need to legalize nationally. This is another really clear contrast between myself and my opponent, who simply says that is not on his agenda. But I recognize that the failure to legalize marijuana is actually used as a tool of oppression, particularly against black and brown lives. We see black and brown people arrested almost 4 times more likely to be arrested than white people for marijuana possession, even though black and white people use marijuana at the same rates. And what has happened is that because we allow law enforcement to use the smell of marijuana as a reason to conduct searches of cars and individuals that would otherwise be illegal. It is used as a tool to arrest people. And it has led to the destruction of families and communities and economic stability for hundreds of thousands of people. So the legalization of marijuana is a carceral issue. It's not just about people who want to recreationally use marijuana. The keeping marijuana illegal is a threat to Black lives in our country, and we absolutely need to legalize, release people who are in jail on marijuana possession charges and marijuana related charges, expunge their records, and ensure that the tax revenues from a legal marijuana market are invested in the communities that were most harmed by the war on drugs. So Liz Reed says, can you speak to Medicare for All or universal health care? So I believe health care is a human right. And I believe in Medicare for All as the way of ensuring that. We are the wealthiest country in the world. It's absolutely inexcusable for people to go without basic dignities like healthcare. And I think that sometimes people use universal healthcare and Medicare for All interchangeably. I think we get to universal healthcare through Medicare for All. That's my belief. Comprehensive Medicare for All that covers medical, dental, vision, hearing, long-term care, mental health care, addiction services. The whole self needs to be covered rather than this piecemeal sort of patching together of coverages that we have now. And that is an expansion of current Medicare. It would improve on Medicare that we have right now for seniors, which is not fully comprehensive in a lot of ways and leaves people behind and creates gaps for people, particularly when it comes to prescription coverage. So I believe in using Medicare for All to get to universal coverage. Not even coverage. The idea of coverage kind of goes away. You go to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor, and it's paid for through a single payer system of Medicare for All. I also believe in instituting caps on the cost of prescriptions, out-of-pocket costs for people. Okay. Britt asks, what's your view on giving schools a free pass on litigation relating to special needs services during COVID? I don't think anyone should be getting any sort of pass on delivering special needs services. They absolutely have to be maintained. I mean, they're already not funded enough to then say that a pandemic is a reason to not deliver on the needs of special needs students is, I think, a real slap in the face of those students and those families. This can absolutely be done. This is part of my core platform, is that the federal government does not do nearly enough to fund education as a whole in our country. The state of Delaware only gets 10% of its school funding from the federal government, and that is far too little. This is something that the federal government needs to make a priority. It needs to fully fund legislation that is already in place, like IDEA, which is to guarantee these services for students who have disabilities or special needs. So I don't think a pandemic is an excuse to not guarantee the programming and education that all students need and deserve. I recognize that it's hard right now, though. And I think that, again, this is a place where our federal government and a lot of the state governments have failed educators and administrators because they are not giving good direction. They are not providing the resources that are necessary. And I think it's been incumbent on teachers to try to find their way through it on their own, like we've asked of them so many times before. And that's a real point of failure that needs to be fixed. Allie asks, what's your stance on capital punishment? I don't think that the government should have a right to kill people. I am opposed to capital punishment. Just scrolling some others here in our last 10 minutes. So Michael asked, would you support legislation that funds nuclear energy research and builds the next generation of nuclear power plants? And this is a good question, because I think people often say, like, is nuclear part of our plan going forward? And what I've been told by people who are in this business is that we don't actually have the scale of nuclear right now to make a big enough impact. And the scale up to use nuclear would not meet the time scale of what we would need to transition. So we're in this kind of bind when it comes to nuclear where it's not enough for us to rely on right now, and the timeline to use it as a transition a tool to transition off of fossil fuels is, based on what I've been told by specialists in this field, is it's the timeline is too long. And I think we still don't really have a great answer for what to do with spent nuclear fuel. So I think that while nuclear can kind of serve a role in what we have right now, it feels like most people are of the side that like that is going to be spun down, and that it's actually a shrinking industry right now, based on trend, not a growing one. And we're looking at more of some of the more renewable resources, like solar and wind, to actually transition us off of fossil fuels. Okay. Gabe asked a question about put an end to. Are you willing to put an end to corporate buyouts, stopping big businesses from buying small ones? This is a real issue. Like, we have seen levels of consolidation, particularly since the last Great Recession, that have left us with essentially these massive conglomerate companies and very little competitors. And we really have not done anything to stop it. Our government has kind of failed us in this way. And the standard for using monopoly law has become, does it affect consumer prices? Rather than, is the company or the industry actually monopolistic? And the problem with that is then you get a company like Amazon who has so much power that they can actually drive down consumer prices. So it's not quote unquote harmful for the consumer, but it does make it so that no one else can play in that space because they are controlling prices in a way with the size and power that they have that make it so that no one else can make any money. And I do think that we have to be concerned about this. I mean, I think even right now with what we're going through in this pandemic of so many small businesses that are going to shut down, and we're going to be left with so many fewer businesses that make our communities unique. You know, cafes closing, restaurants closing, and it's going to clear space for, again, these large chains or conglomerate companies to kind of come in and be the only game in town. So I absolutely believe that the federal government should be using its power and regulatory power to either look at breaking up companies that have become massive conglomerates. This is particularly in the communication space and telecom space. This was something that was done, legislation under Bill Clinton that allowed for the conglomerates of telecoms. That has not been undone. Or we have to look at nationalizing these companies. If you get to a point where you have become the de facto internet e-commerce delivery system, then maybe that becomes part of the federal government and we take it over, because we have to have real controls in place that protect people, protect workers, and don't create these kind of singular monopolistic markets that we have right now. All right. I know there's a couple. Okay, so Britt asked a question. If in the Senate now, would you fight that part of the stimulus package being proposed? So I think that what we have been calling for since March and what we have yet to see is a people's bailout. We saw in March pretty decent movement on the CARES Act, but and people were surprised, like, oh, Republicans are coming around. They're actually going to give individuals $1,200. They're going to say yes to expanded unemployment. But the feeling was that they said yes to those things because they also got a massive corporate handout. And now they're not coming to the table because they don't have anything they want anymore, because they don't care about legislating for working people who are suffering right now. And what we have is a lot of corporate Democrats who are beholden to corporate interests. We have a lot of Republicans who are beholden to corporate interests, there's a stranglehold of this corporate power on our government right now. So I would be advocating for extending the additional unemployment insurance. Frankly, we should be looking at making things like that permanent, because they have proven themselves to be strong safety nets. I would be advocating for eviction moratoriums and cancellations of rent and mortgages through this period. I'd be advocating for ensuring that people's salaries can be replaced. So even if for example, if you're still working, but you have your server, for example, and your wages have been crippled because people aren't going out to restaurants anymore, we could be doing wage replacement for people to ensure those who aren't receiving unemployment are still making the money that they need. Everything that I would be looking at was, how do we prioritize ensuring stability in the lives of working people? And that is, how do we get them health care? This would have been a great opportunity to extend Medicare coverage to people in our country, get them used to the idea of a single payer system, show them that it actually works, that it's not something to be fearful of. Once you give the people things like that, it's a lot harder to take them away. So those are the types of things that I would be fighting for in a package. I don't want to run long because I know I really did that to everybody last week. So I'm going to close out here. I know there's a few more comments and questions that I don't think I got to, but we will always try to follow up in the chat afterwards. So thank you again for always showing up and asking such great questions. Again, if we didn't get to it, we'll try to follow up, or shoot me a DM and we'll follow up that way. We are 6 weeks from our election on September 15th. As I said at the beginning, people are going to start getting ballots. So this is crunch time. Every single day counts when it comes to fundraising and voter contact in this election. So if you are able to volunteer, sign up at justfordelaware.com/volunteer. We need you. We need every single person who wants to support this campaign to get involved. And your time will not be wasted. You will be trained quickly and put into our team of phone bankers, and you will be put to work immediately, reaching out to voters, telling them why you support, having one-on-one real conversations with people about how we can build a government that works for all of us. So please, if you can give us 3 hours a week, 6 hours a week, that's what it's going to take to win. We need to do the work to get the votes. And it's really a metrics-based thing. We make the phone calls, we get to have the conversations, we win the votes. And I can speak for both doing the phone banking myself, as well as the stories we hear from volunteers. We have good conversations. People are looking for this. We are running on the things that people want. People know the problems in their lives. They know the solutions to them. They want someone who's going to fight for those solutions. And that's what we're doing. And people want someone who's going to fight alongside them. They want to be brought into this, and they're happy to have a choice. So you can be a part of letting them know that they have this choice and that there's someone running to support them. JessForDelaware.com/volunteer. Again, fundraising is incredibly crucial right now. If you can chip in, every dollar counts. If you can chip in and then tell your friends and get 5-10 more friends to chip in, that's incredibly valuable too. So JessForDelaware.com/donate is where you can make a donation. Again, every dollar matters. $1 gets us something like 18 phone calls. So every time we dial someone, it costs us money, but that's money well spent because it's how we win votes. So please help us, JessForDelaware.com/donate. I think I actually gave the wrong URL for signing up to volunteer. I forgot that it changed. I apologize. It's now mobilize.us/JustForDelaware. I'm sure someone in the chat corrected me. I apologize. Forgot that we moved our things around. It's a lot easier to use now, though. So sign up to volunteer at mobilize.us/JustForDelaware. And we have merch. We have yard signs, we have t-shirts, we have hats, we've got car magnets coming. We have masks if you want to rep the logo while you're out and about. So masks aren't up there yet, and bumper stickers aren't up there yet, but they're coming soon. But everything else is in the shop. JessForDelaware.com/shop. Great way to show your support, as well as make a donation. I will be back next Monday, 7:30 as always. Please invite your friends, anyone you think who might be interested or who may not be interested but still would be willing to listen. Absolutely invite them. This is why we do this. We do this to get in front of people. We've been doing it for this entire time that we couldn't be out talking in person and having town halls in person. And it's been really fruitful, and I think it's helped spread our message. So you can absolutely help ensure that people in the state of Delaware know they have a choice in this election. So thank you again. Sorry I messed up the volunteer link. And we'll talk to you next week. So bye.